Okay, so when Chris gets going here, he's going to talk about this document, which is in your handouts. So I'm showing it on the screen right now because this is a free resource that a lot of people worked on, like for a long, long time. We started 5 years ago creating a dictionary terminology for everyone. And then that became the Edgy Jedi group. And then that became a bunch of other stuff that Chris is going to talk about. But I just want you to see this resource on screen for a second because it's kind of amazing. It has a whole description of what's going on in the digital world, what are best practices, the model that he's going to talk about, and then the standards in draft that he's going to talk about, and then it gets into the dictionary. As you can see, this dictionary is extensive and it provides you a ton of understanding, which is actually a baseline now for teachers. Okay, so coming back to the slide deck so people can see that. Okay, Chris.
Hey, Lonnie, while you're getting that up, I'll go ahead and introduce myself to the folks that are online with us.
Yep, it's up.
So my name is Chris McMurray, and I'm the VP of the Edgy Jedi leadership with the Learning Council. I've been around education for some time. I was a teacher, and I was a principal and an instructional coach, and most recently I was the CAO with a larger school district in Washington State, and so it's fascinating to me. I've been listening in on a lot of the commentary and discussion on this session and in the previous session that we ran. And a couple of things are sort of popping out of commentary for me that I think are meaningful. One of the things that I heard today was one-to-one requirements, which I place in the context of one-to-one initiatives, which we very recently were talking about in education. And I feel like that's fascinating to me that we've transitioned in our vernacular to requirements and something that is and just has to work. And be present to from something that was maybe optional. And for those of us who have been talking this talk for a long time, I heard a colleague from Texas in the last session. She said, this is what we've been preparing for all these years, and we have, right? And we've been walking through this sort of scenario and all of the things that we're discussing, all of the stuff that Becky was talking about with students with special needs. That's not brand new, folks. That's not. And yet now that everyone's thrown into the fire with this, having some guidance and some leadership, I think is critical. And I applaud everyone for jumping into this with both feet and really giving it a go. I think it's remarkable. So. This workshop that we're going to sort of spend a scant hour in today is really about the differences in digital learning experience. And so with the current health crisis and movement and of what education really should look and sound and feel like, or learning rather, differentiating what happens in digital is really important. And some of the things that Lonnie just showed in the dictionary document, including the standards and including some of the frameworks, it's critical that educators and those supporting teachers and kids understand the terminology and have a clear understanding and utility with the definitions and be able to start naming things, because that's really important as we start to design. And the quote on the slide is true, right? Technology should make teaching and learning easier, and it should. There's a lot of things that we can leverage over to allow machines to do, because they do those things very well. And so knowing how to accurately use and choose technology tools is really important, so that you're not wasting a lot of time. So I want to start out with sort of some context and history for this before we dig in a little bit more. And so the work of the Edgy Jedi on the dictionary and the standards and the model and frameworks and things really go past the digital literacy. And what we're really talking about is resources that can help us to allow learning to be rich and the experiences to be rich, and allow teachers to leverage their strengths in terms of personalizing, which we've just heard some great examples of. Element Education, it really started to speak the language of personalization, leveraging technology, and breaking down barriers of pace and place and space, and that's fantastic. And so allowing for this asynchronous learning that is still teacher led, as the slide reads, is really sort of the business at hand, and sort of the thing that we all aspire to sort of take on and perfect in our practice. So some history. The original dictionary, as Lonnie had mentioned in 2015, it had about 71 definitions of the characteristics of digital curriculum. And so then through some iterations and some hard work from folks like Carla Burkholder, and she's near San Antonio in Texas, and a bunch of other folks, the Edgy Jedi grew the definition set and the dictionary to over 100 characteristics. And so this year, I think this year's edition has over 200, which is remarkable. It's not a heavy read, folks, so don't be afraid of it. The knowledge just keeps getting deeper, and so the in terms of the next logical step in its development, instructional design and standards were really the next step, because once we've identified the vocab, now what do we do with it, and how do we use this in our practice? And that's really sort of where the evolution of this document sort of has been. And so everybody knows the ISTE standards, or is at least aware of them, and others. And I mean, there's other standard sets. And those are really logically designed around distribution models, teacher distribution. And so they're not necessarily acknowledging what's actually happening in the software, that actually helps with the previous slide, which was technology helping teaching and learning be easier. And so allowing technology to take over some of the things that are kind of a heavy lift, or maybe tedious for teachers. And so things like national standards for quality online learning, things like that, are all very based on sort of a how to teach online. But what was really missing was how to choose and use resources, and how to be discerning in the actual operation and procurement of those, and causing learning through technology. And so that's a mindset shift. That's a perspective shift for sure. So that's kind of where it came from. So the dictionary is really.
Chris, let me know if I get off track. Like, sure. If I get off track on. Yep. Okay.
No, it's fine. I'm good. I'm just rolling. Okay. And so the slides really, folks, for those of you tuning in, the slides are going to follow my commentary. And if it looks like I need to go fore or aft, I'll let you know. So the definitions within the dictionary really are sort of broken out into some sections. Section 1, for example, goes through main types of software things on the education landscape. So setting the framework, all of the sort of the baseline things, the systems, the software, the apps, So back in 2015, as part of this thinking around what the needs were within the digital curriculum characteristics, a scale was developed that sort of places all of those things within a sort of a scope, right? And so you're looking at digital curriculum characteristics and things that are along a scale of complexity, and then placed as a layer upon things that allow that allow more automated learning, or things that are going to require more explicit instructional planning or teacher time. And so, for example, you can see on the slide here, and this is in the dictionary as well. I think this is something that's interesting to consider as a planner of learning, and a designer of learning. These are all things that need to be understood and and then articulated within a plan. And I think if you don't truly understand the differences between them and what the repercussions or the opportunities are that go along with them, then it becomes really difficult to be masterful in the design. So if you think of the lowest level there being the digital document, that's a Google Doc, right? It could be a PDF. It's a discrete piece of information, and it may be out of context. It might be something that you've gone out and Googled for, and you found online, or it's a paragraph or an article, something that's relatively standalone, and it's just sort of at the bottom level of sophistication, and then moving up from there, thinking about things that like single loop animation. So for example, making a PowerPoint slide do something where things fly in or morph or dissolve or spin or something like that. And whether or not those two are highly engaging in the design is something to understand. I mean, there may be places for all of those things, but in terms of the scale of requiring more teacher time to allowing the technology to leverage the teacher time that is given, and do more, that's important. So then, for example, moving up to video and then collections and feedback, video is like creating a video or editing a video, then that might be the teacher telling something or explaining something that the kids explaining something that they can replay and rewind, and there's power in that as well. Up to collections of things and sequencing things, up to feedback, which could be more sort of feedback loop types of things where people are answering questions or asking and answering questions, and so the student or the learner can have some of those things automated so that the teacher isn't necessarily having to intervene all the time. They're actually getting the answers to the questions or additional information. Some of them are adaptive. And then up to sort of the coding level of things, of technology things, and this would be, for example, WordPress or any of the blog type sites where a modicum of coding is necessary in order to engage something that's fairly sophisticated and can be very helpful to the learners on the other side, all the way up to this sort of top end of the scale, which is really algorithms and automations, and they're designed courseware, and they're things that create worlds for learners around math or things like that, and they're very gamified. And by gamified, I don't mean that you're necessarily a character in a world and you're playing Minecraft. By game like, we're really starting to talk about how the software application is helping people move through levels of learning, and how are they moving through their own path. We listened to Terry and Anthony talking about personal learning pathways, and we've been talking about that for a while, and to have technology that really helps you as a learner to follow your own path, that's awesome, right? And so that means that with some authoring on the teacher's part, not necessarily coding, but really some organizing. If I have a tool like that as a teacher, I've all of a sudden built time for myself, and I've also then helped to engage learners, and that's really powerful. So thinking about that as the top level, as sort of that highly designed digital courseware, as sort of the nirvana of some of these systems that we've all been kind of talking about, and the personalized learning plan. And I think it was Terry and Anthony that were talking about the expo learning type of a structure and configuration. And that really is if I could find a place to put the sort of the high end of this scale to work, it would be in that expo learning configuration, because then all of a sudden I am not tied to a space or a place. I can actually move as a learner through things at my own pace. So it's pretty remarkable, and it's very exciting. for me to think about where we've come from. So what was really observed at that time by the Learning Council is that essentially, when you employ the higher proportion of those sophisticated digital things you employ, the lower your planning time and sort of prep time becomes, and you're able to then allow teachers back some time to personalize and build some relationships, which is really, as I talk to educators now, it's one of the things that comes up as being a need or maybe a thing that they didn't anticipate having lost, and that's remarkable to me. I think that we're going to enter a time where we're going to need to start thinking about how do we continue to build relationships that are at the center of the learning in the new configuration of what learning looks like these days. So anyway, so as we move through this conversation of digital objects and things, if we transition from the scale of those to the evaluation of those, it's important that we think about sort of the granular aspect of those and how all of those objects fit together. So the Learning Council created this digital learning object scale several years ago, and it's a methodology of evaluating digital things. And so it actually showed up first in the Going Digital Special Report, and so now it's sort of codified into the digital learning experience standards, and you can sort of, if you look at all of these documents that have come from the Learning Council, you can see how these are sort of iterative and organic, and they're beginning to evolve and move into certain other types of utility, which is fascinating to see. And so to look at the scale, thinking about the top of the triangle, this is the discrete concept form of digital content. So that would be like a digital paragraph or a document, or a concept related to biology that somebody typed into a system, and it's a short video, it's an image, it's standalone, it's sort of bits and pieces of unrelated content, and they're really not tied to a system, right? They're just granular, they're atomized bits of things. And so then you move up to sort of these discrete bits that are now contextualized, meaning that they're framed into a lesson or a plan or some steps that the learning is supposed to follow. And as you move up even further from that, you get to sort of the courses and ebooks type of a level where now you've actually got some aggregated information, and so you've pulled together a lot of bits, you've placed them into context, and you've put them into a form that is portable and can actually be used in context and help to move some learning. So then above that is a number of other boxes, and those things are essentially very similarly organized from sort of disaggregated to more aggregated, and so these are really things that are going from, for example, short form to long form. So short form things might be sort of a one-off game app that only has one module, and it's about an hour of learning and something like your alphabet. So long form apps have multiple modules and multiple functions and might cover a number of subjects and grades, and might plug into things like Microsoft Word or Google. And so what you might imagine that above that, in terms of granularity, then we move into courses and courseware, and where those are really coming forward at the sophistication level, because, for example, the courseware being above courses is mainly because it automates the animation of the concepts, and so it's doing something with all of the information that has just been aggregated, and it could include things like predictive modeling or some intelligent learning engines that are based on create an adaptive experience based on what the teacher is doing and or rather the student's doing, or the learner, and what the teacher is inputting. And that's fascinating. Above that, are collection systems, which are all of the things, and yet they are leveraging AI and machine learning, and they're really beginning to recommend both discrete pieces of information, but also full courses for learners based on where the learner is in their path. And it's sort of like, I need to go find the next Dutch Bros, and I'm driving in Oregon through smoke. Then my learning, my navigator is going to be able to tell me, and so that's sort of at the top of that scale. So what ideally we would be doing as educators and designing of learning in this digital space is really being able to articulate and move toward something more sophisticated. And so we're relying on our partners who are developing these systems to create those tools, but then it's incumbent upon us to be discerning in how we select them, and then also in how we apply them, and be clear about that. So the next slide really talks about that scale placed into sort of with a couple of lenses on it. And so you might look at this graphic here, thinking about the evaluation scale of things, and thinking about how hurried, to use the terminology of the graphic, where you might think, in terms of evaluating tools, now that we know we need to start moving within those areas, how rigorous is your evaluation of tools? And as you're choosing ST Math, where does that fall into your assessment of the tool in the system? And so, for example, on the level 1 sort of overall type of evaluation, you might be looking for fairly simple things. You might be looking for privacy and security, PII is being addressed. You might be looking for scope and sequence. You might be looking for overall quality or the feel of the thing. You might be looking for time used, or how much time is a learner supposed to be actually using this to see some sort of benefit. It's fairly low end, but you can do it in a super hurried sort of a way. You can then move into all the way up to the level 3, the third level, which really takes some more time. And so you're moving from kind of a general view to, let's take a look at the learning object actually, all the way up to where does this land in terms of academic rigor. And so for my own experience, we were on the very bleeding edge of evaluating digital learning objects, and trying to sort of wade through. We were in the process of a one-to-one transformation. It was a technology transformation that we've all experienced, and there weren't a lot of models out there, right? We were kind of making it up, and we were sort of plodding through, gosh, how do we even know if this is going to number one, work within our ecosystem, but then what do we do with it, and how do we evaluate for things like aesthetics, right, or linearity, for example, or fidelity. I mean, all those things that are that sort of push on creativity. How do we measure for that? And so having a lens like this allows you to start thinking about, as I'm moving through my selection of materials or software for my ecosystem, how do I go about creating layers of lenses that I can use, and how do I start to think in terms of a system of assessment of those tools? How do I start the conversation about, does this push creativity, and does this push thinking and analysis? Does it actually support personalization, or is it not? And those are really important considerations for systems to grapple with and come to some conclusions about. Otherwise, we're going to continue to struggle to make make personalized learning that leverages technology in our current situation actually a reality and an engaging thing. There's been conversation about students checking out, and yeah, they are, and of course they will. And it's then our job to make sure that we've got an engaging and high rigor experience. The quality has to be way up there, which means that the quality of the resources that we use also has to be up there. So this is a good look at what those three layers might be and the lenses that you might use. There's a lot more conversation that goes behind this and on top of this, and you know, we've got a lot of these types of conversations scheduled for the next couple of months. And so if you're just hearing and seeing this for the first time, I really encourage you to check back in because it's going to be time to dig into this. And if you're in the place with your system that you're needing to sort of think through these things, this is the group that can help that. So moving on to sort of the software model architecture. Following some of the evaluation matrix work, the Learning Council came forward with a model of what the digital landscape is looking like, and some of the back-end systems and sort of the world of content resources out there. And you can sort of see in this graphic that by grade, the bits and pieces that change and that change and that shift causes a lot of work, right? And so the complexity and volume of digital things in the K-12 landscape, it's clear that routing it was missing in the market and in the world of education. And so if you have all of these digital things floating around, some are more complex than others, and some are connected, and some are disparate, and it becomes daunting to think about. And so that routing or logistics really takes a lot of the burden off, but that hadn't been identified before. Everybody had all the stuff. They had all the ST maths, and they loved Gigi, and all of the things were kind of working, but everything was just sort of a juggle. And I don't think that systems had really thought about what would that digital burden be, and that's where we're starting to hear educators say, "Wow, I'm working longer hours than I ever did," and that's not healthy, but it can be helped, and it can be helped by understanding systems and resources that will remove some of that burden. And I say that a lot of that responsibility is with administrators, and we can get into that a little bit further when we talk about standards, but that's got to be the support. Our administrators have to be able to support the system. So from that point, from that previous slide, the Learning Council and the Edgy Jedi sort of stepped back and imagined what would happen when all of the technologies converged and you applied a lens of logistics, and you were able to really fully personalize learning pathways with some oversight. And so if you're looking at this graphic, that's like an air traffic control room, or it's like any of the interesting 80s nuclear war types of movies with our favorite characters. It's really, there's a lot of arrows going around, but at the very center of it is kids, right? And the kids are getting the thing that they need when they need it, and yet the adults are able to sort of move through the space as needed and meet the kids where they are. And it breaks down the traditional structure of school. It isn't marching to bells like was mentioned earlier today. It isn't that. We're not sitting in classrooms of 32 kids anymore listening to a lecture. That's not happening. Kids are moving through space, and the learning is happening where the learning is most efficient for that thing, and they're getting what they need and they're moving on. And so this is really a great model. It was called Workflow Personalized Learning Experience, and it really starts to envision unburdening teachers and using the humans for their abilities and allowing the machines to leverage what they do best as well. And so it really is an interesting restructuring, but it is something that we actually have a number of school districts working toward, and they're taking stabs at it, and they're picking little pieces of the system and starting to apply some of these concepts, and that's fantastic, because I think that this is going to be where learning structures need to start showing up. So anyway, back to the dictionary. The dictionary, it's a great document, and so not to be self-serving, but the document is actually really good. And so as an educator, where was this when I was starting to go through all of the transition and sort of the transformation? Wish that I had it, because it really would have helped. So we sort of touched on categories. So the categories really help to compartmentalize the definitions. So making it easier to understand software is really the goal. And so understanding what each of those categories is helps you to get through the dictionary. There's a section of the dictionary at the very beginning that really does a great job of contextualizing the rest of the information. So as you look through the dictionary offline, I'd definitely download it. But take a look at that, because it gives you some sense of how you might use these definitions and what sort of value the knowledge is going to bring to your system and the thing that you do. So the categories, for example, actions, it talks about the functions of the code that do things. So generally, sort of singularly and discretely without involvement from other processes. Design refers to aesthetics or dressing, sort of the navigation, interoperability, things like user onboarding, user options, and things like accessibility and engagement strategies. Controls talks about administrative capabilities. Do you have the ability to modulate the system as a system administrator, and how difficult or easy is that? Customization talks about functions that support decisions to match the needs of learners, individual learners. So for example, individualization, talking about decisions that educators make for learners, and personalization talking about models where learners have options to decide what methods or materials best suit their needs. And that's actually really critical, because as you think about student agency, when we were listening to an earlier session from Element Ed, they were talking about student agency, right? And student agency, if you're actually going to propose that, you're really going to have a system already designed it in place, so that when those learners do take agency and do know how to leverage agency, that they also then understand how to choose, and how to choose from the things that are available. And that in itself is a learning target. That's something that doesn't come naturally. And so this is right on. This is actually right on with the rest of the conversation that's going on today. Instruction talks about lesson giving qualities, content delivery, tutoring, feedback to support student understanding of concepts and things like that. Mechanisms really speaks to digital structures that create a series of steps. So you could say that a mechanism is a series of actions that are built within a small system meant to work in sequences or loops. Those are some of the mechanisms. Business model is actually fascinating to me. This is what organizational model defines the way in which a business relates to customers and creates sustainability. So for example, freemium, right? So there's a bunch of models out there, a bunch of products that are built on a freemium business model. And we know, right, that free isn't free, because then all of a sudden there's a pop-up, and the pop-up says buy premium, upgrade to premium. And so if you're a fifth grader and you all of a sudden get a button to click that says upgrade to premium, do it now, and all of a sudden you're going to have a bunch of stuff flying around your system, and you're going to have requests for things that you didn't really intend to be in the ecosystem, simply because you may or may not have thought through what business model the resources are built around. And that, again, it's one of those lenses, but it's something you got to be aware of, because if you're not, then you're going to be playing catch up. And so that's for sure. You know, it's not something that as educators we necessarily think about, because we think about, oh, what content is being delivered or what activity is being provided, and yet if you're not really cognizant of the business model, it can cause some bog down, and it can really bring some things to sort of a halt. Hostile characteristics also, this is really things that are placed within the system, very related to business models, but this is something that is intrusive, right? It's intrusive upon the user, or it's intrusive upon the district, and a good example of that might be a button that says get the next thing for $9.99, or get something, and you click on the button, and then all of a sudden you're in a different experience, and you've been taken away from your previous learning experience, and it becomes a distraction. It becomes something ancillary that you really didn't need to mess around with. So good to understand that, and good to look for within resources. So it also includes basics. So category 9 is really terms and ideas that are important to understand as you're thinking through how to evaluate and use resources. So that's kind of a look at the categories. So for example, a couple of examples. That's Gigi, by the way. That's my favorite penguin from ST Math. Love that penguin. Super popular with the elementary gang. Spatial and temporal reasoning really gives you a great definition of that, and then gives you some examples. And this is sort of an example of spatial temporal reasoning. What does the user interface tell you about the learning value of the game? Really talking about, for example, in this one, non-use of language. There's no words associated with our penguin friend, and yet the learners know exactly where to go and how to get there, and they experiment and they discover, and that's fantastic. Another example, triggers. So this is a point in the system that once a user gets to it, the system automatically performs a new function via the trigger. So it talks about in the dictionary, really gives you a good sense of what types of trigger procedures might be included within that resource. It's a lot of information. It is, and some of it is going to need to be talked through with various members of the team. Yet it is good information to have. It's necessary information. Modals, right? A modal dialog box. This is sort of the thing that users have to address before they can move on. So it really is. They're not the same as pop-ups. It really is a function of the software, which is good, right? It's critical. Gating, is there gating as a mechanism? So are you moving from one thing to the next through these gates, and are you enabling advancement to the next level of complexity, or loops, or content or material? And so this is another aspect of gaming, right? That isn't my characters running through a world, but it also is how do I as a learner move through this world of the learning experience? And this is something that's expected, right? This is becoming expected as a mechanism. So it really helps to individualize the digital experience, the curriculum. Nesting is another thing, right? These are all examples of information in the dictionary. You can't put something in that's going to be hard to navigate. Overly nested systems, like it says here, if you can't find the stuff, then how do you expect to use it? And if there's too many steps, it really becomes kind of a nightmare. And if you're not aware of that and not cognizant of what that application or the software does to address nested information, then you might be putting something in that's going to cause some conflict. And what will happen then? If it becomes hard, it's going to become, if it becomes hard to use, then it won't be used. And it can be the best resource in the world, but if it's not designed, if it's designed sort of clumsily, and users can't use it very easily, then they're just going to drop it, and they're going to go on to whatever next thing is coming up with. So I want to spend a little bit of time on administrators standards and then move to learner standards and teacher standards. And this is, again, I apologize for the sort of the glancing blow over the top of all these, and I encourage anybody who is interested in having a deeper conversation to find me and or anybody else from the Learning Council, and let's chat about this, because a lot of this is in the process of further development, and we'd love to have some feedback on it and get your thoughts on relevancy and things like that. So I mentioned administrators before, and this is actually something of a sort of a passion for me. As an administrator, my job was my number one job was really supporting teachers and kids, and creating structures that remove barriers for learning design and learning experiences. And so what I appreciate about this set of standards is that as it says here in the slide, it's a professional responsibility of the administrators within a system to set up the lenses and really start to think about how do you select and manage digital stuff, and where do you put it, and how do you help to see pitfalls and potential pitfalls, and help educators select appropriate resources that not only fit into the ecosystem and don't break things, but also foresee and use your crystal ball to take a look at those, and how do you help teachers avoid some of the pitfalls before they even get to them, because you don't have time. You really don't have time. Once the thing is in the wild, if you haven't looked at it closely enough and it causes problems for teachers, that's not good. You skipped a step, and so these are actually really good. They do a good job of thinking through what is the institutional responsibility, right? So this first, for example, the first bullet, the institution weighs impact of the free resource for actual cost and the cost of paid resources, modeling, licensing, etc. All of the stuff that talks about PII, and without having to spend mountains of money with legal companies to help get a data sharing agreement together. Yikes! The teachers, they are not going to be looking at that, right? And if they are, it's with a fairly shallow lens, and it's not a knock on the teachers, because their job is not that. But your job as an admin, yep, it should be that, and it should be, and you should absolutely be pushing things back that don't meet the lens of that data sharing agreement. And if you don't already have your own, there's a bunch of models out there, and it was a battle to get the ones that are working out there in the world, and now they're there, and we can use them all. So don't feel like you got to make up your own. So things like this, so things like what the institution does, it progressively works toward full individualization and personalization, works toward increasing digital pathways of end-to-end lessons and course building workflow, all of those things. Yes, you can read that and nod as an administrator, but are you really? Are you really actually moving toward digital pathways and course building workflow? And if not, then now's the time. Now's the time to do that, because we're not going back. We're not going to go backwards. Now we know enough, and we know more, and we know better, and now we can do that. We can go do those things. So that's a brief, very brief look at the administrator responsibilities. So standards for teachers, similar, right? These standards really talk about the professional responsibilities for the design, the learning design, and student oversight, and how are they composing and designing using the tools at hand, and building things like they're building with Lego. So for example, organized filing structure, how are you tagging and naming objects and other things, digital things, so that you can get to them quickly and build with them? How are you providing small whole and project-based grouping, hands-on learning experiences? How are you staying away from a lecture like we talked about before? That you still have to, the necessity of hands-on and experiential learning hasn't gone away simply because we're digital. It actually is perhaps greater because now we have to engage kids in different ways. So are you using appropriate technology to allow the learners to build, and how are you helping them to do that? Is it artifacts? Is it portfolios? Is it badging? How are the students leveraging agency, and how are you helping them to use agency within the design? And again, if you haven't started thinking about that as a teacher, it's now. Now's the time to start doing that. So student standards, very similar as well. How do I know which tools work best for me? And how do I know how do I know how to evaluate those, and how can I compose and create? Those are all things that are addressed within these standards. And so proofing work. How are you using, what methodology are you using as a student or a learner to proof work? How are you looking at digital materials, and how are you assessing the level of those? And those types of things are being dealt with within these standards for students. And it can be, this is a great time for teams of teachers and school systems to take a look at these standards and start thinking about how is the design that we're currently working with reflected in these, and are we thinking deeply enough about our designs as we go through, and then how do we measure success? And without a lens or a standard set, it becomes difficult to do that. So this is very helpful. It really is. So the next step was to take a look at models, and so if you think about models that are out there in the world for design, for learning design or experience design, the models that are most popular, the Addies model is the one that's being compared here. It's 45 years old. It's designed around teacher, and it's designed around what teachers do, and it's really not acknowledging the shift to student-driven journeys or student-centered experiences. It's not an a learning experience model. It's a teacher designing model. And so it's sort of like in other conversations we talk about designing teaching versus designing learning, and there's a distinct difference. It's very different. It's vastly different. And so having a model of that is actually very helpful. And if you take a look at this model, it's not only more precise, but it's also more expansive and flexible. And it really starts to think about what are for example, the levels of thinking that I have to start to design with, and the differences between traditional instructional design and digital. How am I using the tools that I have in order to design an experience? And for example, sometimes in the early processes, educators try to shoehorn digital resources and digital systems into the old models, and that doesn't work, right? You have to sort of dump out the Legos and then build something new with them, because the old structures don't really acknowledge the differences and potentials that digital can actually bring to the table. So old design steps were super linear, whereas the digital systems that we're currently using are really non-linear. I think we had a conversation before about mind map types of thinking, and that's awesome because it starts to look a lot like that Expo Learning model that we looked at with a bunch of arrows and kids moving hither and yon. And so that's fascinating. So a couple of the ways that this is sort of a different, some significant differences between the Edgy Jedi model and Addies. It really starts taking breaking down some of the assumptions of place and time, some of the things that are central to personalized learning. It starts to address those. It starts to think about goal setting, not necessarily seat time types of things, not the end goal type of a learning task, starts thinking about synchronicity between standards and pacing guides and calendaring and things like that. It really starts to think about rather than a problem posed by the designer, allows for the problem or questioning to be discoverable or be student-led. So we know, for example, that the ability to have some facility with questioning is actually a learning trait that leads to greater understanding. And so all of the aspects of the discoverability of things is critical if we're going to start pushing critical thinking and some higher level thinking. So it really talks about that autonomy and the agency, and that's directly related to any of the conversations around personalization, because student agency and efficacy and identity are all at the very center of all of those. And this Edgy Jedi model begins to do a great job of setting that into a frame and into context. So I know that I'm dangerously close to my time, and I apologize that I didn't leave more time for questions, but hopefully things are popping up in there. Again, this is a great time for you to think about, and if you're out there tuned in, think about the kinds of challenges that you're experiencing currently, and really the question to you is, how is this information connected with what you're currently experiencing? I'm going to lob that one out into the cloud because I am curious about that. I'm curious to know from anybody out there, how is this connecting? Does this resonate?
Okay, Chris, we haven't had any questions come in, so I'm going to make sure people are unmuted so they can speak up, and then I can call on them like the teacher, that person that I am. If you don't raise your hand, you will have your hand raised for you. So, it's one of those deals.
Good.
So,
I was also a secondary guy, so I've practiced wait time, and so I'm actually quite good with that as well.
Mm-hmm. See who comes up. So we have quite a few people on the call right now. So anybody that's listening in and wants to mention something about these, please feel free to do so. Misu, I know you're still on the line, and Anitra Walker and Catherine Salduti, Courtney, Rebecca Ingram, you're on the line. Making sure you're unmuted. You guys are unmuted. And, we also have some other people on the line. I know Paulette Donnellan, who's going to be a panelist later in the day, you're on the line. Paulette, do you want to speak up for a second? I know we mentioned Lego a moment ago, and that's very exciting because I know you're aligned with Lego and all their wonderfulness. But this sort of construct, go ahead, Paulette.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself. I was going to say, could I make a comment, which great talk, by the way, but I and not to be biased or anything, but I loved your analogy to Lego. So, because I do work for Lego education. So thank you for that. But it does work as a great analogy to what you were describing there. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I also know that when I first started sort of putting my mind around this is a lot of information, and I fully know that processing time is necessary, and I also know that if we were sitting in a room together with round tables, there would be Post-it notes, and I would be encouraging thinking and writing right now, and then talking. And so definitely, sort of in the waning minutes of our time together, take some time to digest this and look at it, and then come back to one of the other sessions and maybe start a different conversation, because we're going to be digging into this for the next couple of months with educators, and really wanting folks to start internalizing and adding this to the thing that you're building. And Paulette, thanks for the toss out with the Lego. I'm a Lego guy. I'm unabashedly a Lego guy. And in fact, I've inherited 3 large bins of Lego that I had purchased ostensibly for my kids. And thankfully they didn't want them any longer. So I am now the new happy owner of the Lego that I may or may not have purchased for myself. So Yeah, this is,
No,
you know,
there's we call that something, by the way. I'm just gonna, it's AFOL, which is adult fan of Lego. So,
oh,
and,
absolutely.
so I'm
I am
just
such
gonna
a
put it out
fan.
there. I'm kind of a Lego girl too. So funny how
Nice.
that.
Yep, it's also very possible that I have a number of Star Wars spaceship kits in my office at this very moment. It's very likely that that's a
Well,
case.
thank you for your contribution to my paycheck. So I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, good.
Good.
Okay, so everyone that's on here right now is going to get this digital learning experience granted badge from the No Story system. We're going to start administering those badges some few days after the event is all the way over. Takes us a little bit to get all that admin done. We have to look up everybody, and if you're not in the system, we have to invite you to the system to claim your badge. But that's all going to be done, and so our thanks for this talk. I know it's heavy, but that's the moment that we're in. If we're going to transition education, like you were saying, Chris, we have to get a little into the weeds with how all this works. So this is the weeds. It's not that hard. It was a lot of work to put together those draft standards, the draft Edgy Jedi model, and all of those definitions of terms, but it's an incredible resource. And yeah, so make sure you download it if you haven't already. It's in this webinar right now. It will also be a link in an email that we send out for all the attendees post the event. So you have that. So I'm going to be moving on, but thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lonnie, and thanks everybody who participated today.